Welcome back to the Crash Course Podcast. My name is Craig Crash Collins, joined as always by Brandon Scott, otherwise known as B. Scott. We've got a lot of basketball to talk about tonight. We're going to talk a lot about college basketball as, in a couple of weeks here, the scheduled start of the college basketball season will be underway. We're gonna talk about Purdue. We're gonna talk about IU. We're gonna talk about Notre Dame, Butler. We're even gonna get into a mid-major school that we think could have a pretty good season. So you know what? I'm really excited to be Scott because we're getting into a part of the year where we're gonna get college basketball going again, which is always a fun time. Getting everybody back on the court again.
Yeah, and you know what? I realized I stepped up to the plate wearing my March Madness gear.
I see that. I like it. I'm digging it.
Which big potential breaking news? Nothing finalized, obviously, but I mean, Indiana just got some great news potentially today, in the fact that the entire men's basketball tournament looks like it's going to be held right here in the state of Indiana, in Indianapolis or surrounding areas. So that's exciting. Obviously, the news broke, and they're saying that they want to try to get everything finalized by January 1st. And talking to city and state officials, I know Channel 13 here in Indianapolis tonight did a story that Butler and Indy Sports Corps are working really hard on getting this finalized, because this would be a big deal for the state of Indiana. I mean, basketball grows here is the motto for the state, essentially. And to be able to host the NCAA men's basketball tournament bubble, in essence, that'd be a pretty cool thing for the city.
Oh, yeah, I'm really excited about that possibility. Now, something that got me even more excited when I sent this tweet to you, B. Scott, was was a tweet where somebody said, if they're going to have all of the NCAA tournament in the state of Indiana, what they also need to do is they need to make it to where other big gyms and big schools throughout the city and throughout the state get a chance to host some games. Some of the pictures I saw were Newcastle. Of course, that's the biggest gym. You've got Southport. You've got some places like that. Now, granted, probably isn't going to happen, but because most likely it's going to be Lucas Oil, it's going to be Hinkle, it's going to be the Pepsi Coliseum, it's going to be Banker's Life. You could possibly, I don't know, could you get 2 courts in Lucas Oil? If you really tried, if you really wanted to.
You see, okay, I'll just preface. I don't know anything. I know as much as everybody else knows, and I mean that's pretty much obvious for everything out there. I don't know anything, but to me, Lucas Oil Stadium, if you're not going to have fans, if it's going to be a true bubble like the NBA did, Lucas Oil just doesn't seem like the right fit to me. Honestly, what seems like a better fit would be the convention center. You can actually, in the ballrooms in the convention center, I think it was the FIBA World Championships were at the Indianapolis Convention Center back in the early 2000s. I mean, the U.S. got completely embarrassed that year that it was here in Indianapolis, but it was at the convention center, and there were multiple courts set up. So you could conceivably have multiple courts set up at the convention center. You could have courts set up. You can play games at the Pepsi Coliseum, Hinkle Fieldhouse. I don't know about how Bankers Life Fieldhouse is going to work out, mostly because the Pacers are going to be in the middle of their season. And I don't know the exact date, but possibly could collide. The first rounds or the early play-in games, the first 2 rounds could potentially collide with the IHSAA men's state basketball championships as well. I'm trying to remember when those are. I should know these things because when I was in high school, we played at state every year.
Weird flex, but okay, it's fine. I get it.
Well, it was usually around my spring break, but around spring break was also the Final Four.
I mean,
so I'm just trying to remember if that seems to line up correctly.
I mean,
but...
to be fair, I also should know what weekend it is because I got to call the 1A state championship for basketball in 2018. I think it was
so
for
that's a lot sooner. I mean, that's a lot more recent.
Yeah,
than me
and I have no idea, so it's fine.
But,
it's all good.
So that makes me wonder about Bankers Life Fieldhouse and the availability there for it, because to have that many games and I mean, there's a lot of basketball that could be played at that point in time in the state of Indiana or the city of Indianapolis at that, and trying to work around the Pacers schedule, boys state championships, Bankers Life may be an issue. Now, hosting for like the Final Four and the national championship, I could see it being at Bankers Life Fieldhouse, a smaller venue if you're going to allow any sort of fan in there, like kind of like the Big Ten's doing, I guess, parents and family and friends of teams and team personnel. I think Bankers Life would be a good fit. I mean, obviously, the women's Final Four and national championship, the most recent years that have been held in Indy, has been at Bankers Life. But to me, it just financially, it doesn't seem like Lucas Oil Stadium would be a smart move unless you're going to allow fans. I don't know, but there's plenty of options around, and I know there was even some words in the press release used that, surrounding areas. So that makes me then wonder, like, hey, are Mackey Arena, Assembly Hall, and Worthen Arena, are those in play? Because those have the ability to be set up for major broadcasts. You got to think about that as well, because when you're looking at high school basketball arenas, I mean, maybe Newcastle, maybe
Newcastle
Southport,
probably would. Yeah.
Newcastle, Southport, Center Grove, perhaps.
Maybe like a Carmel.
Those are the only three. Carmel doesn't. Carmel's is not as big as you think.
Really?
It's.
I've never been, but I just assumed.
I've been in there a couple times, and it's not as big as you would think. So the cameras would be almost right on top of the court. I mean, that may even be the case for a place like Pepsi Coliseum. Hinkle Fieldhouse is set up for it, obviously. Mackey Arena is set up for it, obviously. Worthen Arena. I know Worthen Arena is set up for it because I've been a part of those broadcasts there.
Now, the only thing that could get logistically problematic with putting it on college campuses, though, too, is the fact that, college campuses, as we've seen through, some of the Big Ten season, in football and especially the SEC this past weekend, obviously, college football has not where it's been like an extensive outbreak like we saw with the Marlins during baseball season, but
pretty bad in the SEC.
Yeah, it is getting pretty bad in the SEC, but you've seen a lot of outbreaks there, and college campuses. You can have a bubble there, but not really a bubble, especially when you put you put kids close to basically that same environment that you're trying to get them away from, so you can have this bubble scenario.
Right. That is the issue. Now, obviously, hotels, these players, basically like the NBA, to and from the playing venue, back to the hotel. I mean, essentially, I don't know. I've never played on an NCAA tournament team or anything like that. I feel like that's essentially what they have to do anyways because of scheduling and everything.
Oh yeah.
But yeah, I mean, it's just there's a lot of moving pieces to this. I feel like that with a lot of questions, but it is a great sign that this is going to happen. I feel like I'm more confident today after hearing that a basketball tournament can happen than I was probably earlier this week when the cases spiked to record numbers here in the state of Indiana. So,
yeah, I'm very relieved. Not that I don't know what I expected. I don't know that I expected there to not be an NCAA tournament again this year, but I definitely was worried about
I get, yeah.
Yeah, I was like, I definitely like
Horrible.
yeah, I definitely like was thinking about like, well, because it's like we talked about kind of last week, we're kind of finally coming full circle where it was during basketball season that everything shut down in the first place, and obviously, everything is different than it was back then,
Mhm.
which makes it sound like years ago, and it was just literally a few months ago.
It felt like
Early,
years ago,
yeah,
let's be honest.
exactly. Back before we knew who Carol Baskin was. We didn't
I think
know.
we would have figured out who Carol Baskin and the Tiger King were regardless. We just
True.
got lucky that premiered right at the beginning of lockdown.
True, very true. But yeah, no. So I'm very relieved to know there's a plan in place, and that there's a plan early on too. Like obviously the
Yes.
college basketball season hasn't even started yet. We're still a few weeks away from when it's projected to start, and we already have a plan. I mean, obviously things kind of had to happen quick with the NBA and Major League Baseball, their postseason, as far as getting a bubble together, and now they kind of have
Well,
a
Major League Baseball for getting their season even started.
yeah, right. Well, no, I'm just saying like they had to like they put a bubble together literally within the last like few weeks of the regular season, and so it's good to know that that college basketball is getting ahead of this and trying to make sure like, hey, I know that it's not for another 5 months or so, but we want to make sure we have March Madness figured out.
Yeah, and then this sets up um if they can get this all figured out, obviously, this sets up good examples then for women's basketball, for ice hockey. Um, yeah, I think that's the winter side of things that involve like a tournament, but
Right.
like multiple site tournament. Like, because I know like with me, I'm on wrestling and everything, and we're one place for 4 days, so that you're pretty much in a bubble
You're right.
essentially there. But I'm just thinking if this can all come together, this sets up a good model then for other things moving forward. Honestly, I feel like we can all sit back and thank the NBA for this. I mean, had they not put together this bubble type model and how successful it was, I I feel like there would be a lot more uncertainty, and I'm glad that there is a plan, like a modeled plan out there for different organizations and leagues to follow. And I know some of the conferences were looking at that type of thing too, but logistically for conferences to do something like that was going to be a nightmare just because these are student athletes and not athletes that are students. Obviously, courses and classwork come first, and trying to figure all of that out during the regular season would have been a complete nightmare for the conferences. And we saw how bad the Big Ten handled just figuring out how to play football. I mean,
Right.
could you imagine them trying to figure out how to handle a bubble?
Right. And another good thing too, one real quick thing before we get into kind of the previews here is what we were going to originally start off the podcast with was the words from Iona coach Rick Pitino talking about like he wants them to push the season back, have a May Madness and that kind of thing, and this sort of thing kind of puts that to bed. Says, hey, we're gonna get this figured out early and definitely have it in March because I think for one, I think the whole league only approach, or at least keeping it regional, is probably going to happen, but at least we have a plan for how to get the season finished and over with on time.
See, if you push that back to May or push the season back, by pushing men's basketball back, you would essentially be then having to push everything. I mean, you got to remember there's been some fall sports and some conferences that are moving fall sports to the spring. So there's going to be those fall sports championships are going to be happening in the spring. I mean, we all just base our lives around college football, but they're a different entity totally. I mean, they run by their own beat of their own drum. But like, you look at like cross country, you look at volleyball, soccer, a lot of those things are getting moved into the spring, which is the same time that these winter sports championships are happening. So if you move back basketball, that's setting the precedent then to move everything else with it, which then gets moved right into the championship time slot for your spring sports as well. And that is a logistical nightmare for TV broadcasts, for people working championships, for student athletes, just everybody involved. I mean, If I would probably want to pull my hair out just thinking about it if I could, but I can't. So I don't see basketball getting pushed back. I mean, one, it kind of has been pushed back already. Technically, we should have had a basketball season start already. So I think it's going to start here in, I think, 10 or 9 days.
Yeah.
Something like that. I'm not good at math. Never said I was.
Hey, we went to Ball State, so we don't get held
been
accountable
over this
for math.
before. That Ball State education math taught me other things, but not math. But yeah, here in the next 2 weeks, basketball is going to be starting, and everybody's got their schedules in place. I know Purdue finalized their schedule last week, and it's a good regional schedule for them. I mean, obviously they started off on the road down in Florida. They were supposed to be in Cancun, but that's the farthest away they travel, I believe, looking at their schedule until you get into Big Ten play. So, I mean, teams have got things figured out. Now let's just run with it. Let's just go.
Yeah.
You just have to figure out, are you going to allow fans into the stands or are you not? And obviously that's on a school by school, conference by conference basis. Whatever you feel is best for you to make sure that you can put a product on the court, let's do it, in my opinion.
Now let's before we get into the team previews, let's go ahead and let you know that you can follow us at Crash Course FM on Twitter. You can like us on Facebook, Crash Course Podcast. Go subscribe to our YouTube channel, Crash Course Podcast. We have not only do we repost the entire podcast, the video portion every week, but also we have little cut-up segments as well if you don't want to miss that. And remember, you can listen every week on Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, Spotify, wherever the Crash Course Podcast can be heard. You can find it anywhere, wherever podcasts can be heard. And also, we want to let you guys know a little bit of an announcement. This will be the last podcast streamed on Facebook. Starting next week, we will be streaming on Twitch. So we are going to go ahead and make that move over there. So the first week is going to be on my personal Twitch page, Craig Crash. So if you want to go follow that, feel free to do so. We will provide links leading up, and then in 2 weeks we'll actually have our own page, where you can go follow as well. So make sure you guys are locked into that. And also, real quick, before we get into the previews, let's go ahead and knock out this word from Anchor. The Crash Course Podcast is brought to you by Anchor. Looking to start a podcast but don't know where to start? Look no further than Anchor.fm. Anchor allows you to record and edit your podcast right from your computer or mobile device, and will distribute it to other sites such as Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, and Spotify. On a budget, not only is Anchor completely free of charge, but will allow you to make money from your podcast with no minimum listenership. Download the free Anchor app or go to Anchor.fm to get started. Anchor, it's everything you need in a podcast in one place. All right, so let's go ahead and dive into the college basketball preview. First, we're going to start with the Indiana Hoosiers. Last season, they went 20-12. They were 9-11 in the Big Ten. Trace Jackson Davis emerged as an impact player. He averaged 14 points and 8 rebounds per game. There are a lot of high hopes for freshman Christian Lander, but this IU team last year, kind of the big story from them is they were terrible as a shooting team. 172nd in 2-point percentage, 204th in 3-point percentage. This team was very lackluster last season, but there are a lot of high hopes for IU this season. Looking at what the experts have projected for IU, they do have, looking at CBS, they do have them projected at 7th in the Big Ten. They do have them ahead of Purdue, actually, B. Scott, so you may want to write a strongly worded letter to CBS. But yeah, I mean, this is an IU team that under Archie Miller is really trying to get back on track and really trying to get their feet under them and start, kind of getting to a place of, national relevance again, because I know they haven't been where they would like to be as far as the national stage is concerned.
1987.
Right, exactly. So, this is an IU team that has high hopes, but they, are putting a lot on some of these younger players, and those shooting numbers are just kind of hard to look past from last year.
Yeah, they really are. I didn't realize they were that bad. Um, that's kind of surprising, especially the 2 point percentage with Trace Jackson Davis. You know, but when you look at this team, first off, this team is loaded with talent. There's no denying that. Archie Miller has proven himself to be a good recruiter. He knows how to sell his team to good players. I mean, obviously, Trace Jackson Davis, a 5-star recruit. Romeo Langford was a 5-star recruit. Christian Lander is a 5-star recruit. You don't just continuously land 5-star recruits without being a good recruiter. However, those numbers right there tell me everything that I can see from an eye test with this team during Archie Miller's tenure. He has no idea how to utilize the talent once he gets it into his practice room. He has no idea how to utilize it. And those numbers right there show it to me. For goodness sakes, Trace Jackson Davis was a beast on the inside. Early on in the season, yeah, he wasn't totally acclimated to the college game yet. But as the season went on, he got progressively better. I mean, I'm not a basketball coach, but I even know that you feed the hot hand. You feed your best player. You create plays to get the ball into the hands of your best player, right? Or am I wrong?
Yeah.
Tell me if I'm wrong on this concept, but
it's one of those things that, like, you don't have to be, a top of the line, college basketball coach to kind of, pick up on. And yeah, I mean, it's one thing when he's at Dayton era and you can take these players that were snubbed from, other area schools, that they think they should be able to play at an Ohio State or something like that, and they can say, hey, you know what? You have your chip on your shoulder. This is a big enough and a good enough mid-major program where you can kind of show those bigger schools, what they were missing, and instead he hasn't been able to make that talent really translate over to the IU side of things where, he doesn't, those players aren't playing with those same chips on their shoulder. They're going to IU expecting greatness, and that's just not happening.
Right, but at the same time, I feel like he was that way even at Dayton. He left Dayton, and look, all of a sudden, Dayton is now a very good team.
Really? Yeah, it's true.
I mean, the numbers don't lie. The eye test doesn't lie. It's not like he's not getting good players. I mean, come on. He didn't know how to handle Romeo Langford. I feel like he's not utilizing Trace Jackson Davis to his full advantage. And I'm interested to see how he handles Christian Lander. By the way, Christian Lander was a player that reclassified into this recruiting class. So there may be some growing pains there for him. I mean, not too much. He was a 5-star regardless. But still, there may be some growing pains because he should technically be a senior in high school, age-wise. And how does Archie handle that? He hasn't shown the player development. He hasn't shown he knows how to truly utilize the talent once he has it. He has shown that he knows how to get the talent, and that's true. And I hope for the sake of competitiveness that he can try to figure that out. I mean, there's a rolling joke. I mean, it's not really a joke anymore, but there's literally, it's almost been, I think, 4 years since IU beat Purdue in basketball. No joke.
Wow.
Matt Painter runs circles around Archie Miller, to be honest. And
I hadn't realized that.
I think it's like 8 consecutive wins for Purdue against IU. And that's even last year when Purdue was not good. So I'm being honest here. I'm not trying to be a homer, but from what the eye test shows me is Archie, it just does not know how right now. I mean, it may come. He does for right now, though. He just is not proven that he knows how to utilize his best players to their fullest capabilities. I mean, and that's going to hinder them. I also believe that a shortened non-conference season is going to hinder them as well. This is where the homerism will possibly come in right now, but it is fact. IU does seem to load up their non-conference schedule with cupcakes. I mean, they're playing teams I've never heard of before. I mean,
And sometimes they have a hard time handling just those teams.
I mean, they'll never schedule IPFW again. Nope. I guarantee you that. But I mean, there's teams. I'm like, who is that? Is that even a Division I team that they brought in and they beat up on them by 40 points? And everybody's like, this is a great team. Hang another banner. It's like, hold on, you beat the Ivy Tech junior college team for the blind school, essentially. I mean, who did you even play? And then it's like, oh, look, the Purdue Boilermakers, they lost to Texas.
Right.
I mean, come on. They lost to Florida State. It's like, I mean, yeah, IU did beat Florida State last year and Purdue lost to Florida State. I will give them that. But still, I think that's going to hinder them this year, as well as they're not going to have that big cushion there. I mean, they're trying to schedule as many of those teams as they possibly can. But that cushion's not going to be there, and they're going to get thrown into Big Ten play pretty quick, and that's going to show up in their overall record. Now, do I think they're going to be a possible tournament team? I think they could. They have enough talent. If the talent just says forget this and just plays, because that could eventually happen here. Like, Christian Lander is a point guard. He knows who the best player is out there besides him. He's going to feed it to Trace Jackson Davis. I mean, eventually the players are just going to say, you know what, coach, we're actually smarter than you, and we've got this thing figured out. I mean, yeah. It shows how IU and Purdue are perceived now within the state of Indiana. I mean, yeah, Christian Lander's from the Evansville area, so that's IU's right in IU's backyard. But you look at just recently in recruiting, Purdue landed Kaufman. I forget his first name. Kaufman Wren, out of Silver Creek, Indiana, which is right down there in IU territory as well. And this kid is surrounded by IU fans. And, IU people were thinking, we have this thing locked up. There's no way he doesn't come to IU. And then he signs with Purdue. So I feel like the perception and the bright lights of IU are starting to fade. I mean, let's be honest. These kids that are now IU's recruiting weren't even alive for IU's last. They may have been alive for IU's last. I mean, they may have been like 1 or 2 years old for IU's last national championship run.
Yeah.
So you can't hang your hat on that too much anymore. And then the banners, those things are getting dusty. I mean, the last one was 87. I was born in 87. I'm old as dirt. So I'm just saying.
It's kind of it's the same thing we talk about with Notre Dame, where
when you look at Purdue and their big splashy run to being seconds away from making the Final Four against eventual national champ Virginia, and then it's just the perception. I just feel like is completely starting to change within the state of Indiana. If the media follows suit, then yeah, that could happen. But I mean, IU is still IU, and it's always going to be in the state of Indiana. But I think in recruiting terms and in trajectory, I think Purdue is starting to pass IU, or has passed IU. And if I had to put money, as if I was just an innocent bystander that just looked at the numbers, looked at recent history and everything, I would probably put my money on Purdue winning a national championship or making a Final Four before IU.
That brings us to hot and cold. We're gonna do, or hot or cold. We're gonna do it by team here for the preview. So the hot or cold question for IU is: IU will finish with a winning record in the Big Ten this season. I think that's cold. They haven't done so since the 2015-2016 season. That is the pre-Archie Miller era. And honestly, there's a lot of uncertainty in the 2020 season. Will some of these younger guys be able to step up? Will they be able to get their shooting woes under control and back going the right direction? We've already seen, how the coronavirus and stuff has affected college football and that kind of thing. So there's some things that could get in the way that way. I mean, obviously it could happen to any team, so that's not something to hold against IU. But at the same time, there's just a lot of different variables that are at play, a lot of moving parts, and so especially if it's just a Big Ten schedule, I don't think IU finishes above 500 in the Big Ten, and so we'll see. If they're able to, what will happen if they are able to, fit in their schedule of non-conference foes. But yeah, as far as Big Ten play is concerned, I just don't see it happening.
Yeah, I agree. I do think this is a cold take. I think they will be close again, but it will be interesting to see how the top half of the Big Ten performs. Obviously, people are very, very high on Illinois and Iowa and Michigan State, as always. And surprisingly, Wisconsin. I guess I shouldn't be surprised about Wisconsin. Wisconsin was the co-Big Ten champs last year, which totally surprised me. I'm a Big Ten guy, and I follow the Big Ten. But when that happened, I was like, wait, what? What? Wisconsin was co-Big Ten champs?
And they were actually scoring too. It wasn't the Bo Ryan 39-37 finals.
Right. Well, I mean, I didn't watch Wisconsin. I'll admit, I didn't watch Wisconsin's games too much. The one game of theirs that I watched was Purdue absolutely curb stomping them in Mackey Arena. So that's right. I saw that and I'm thinking, wait a second, that team won was a co-Big Ten champ, but they're up there. And then there's always some teams in the Big Ten in the middle of the pack, in the back half that overperform.
Well, I mean, Rutgers has even got high regards this year. I feel like
Rutgers has a lot of returning players. Don't be surprised. That team I feel like is a tournament team as well. But so I think this is a cold take mostly because what their schedule ends up looking like, and also to use your argument from last week on or a couple weeks ago as to why IU could beat Ohio State in football with the lack of a home crowd and home field advantage. Well, that's going to work against IU in basketball and not having the home court advantage with Assembly Hall rocking. Now, unfortunately, Assembly Hall has not been totally full for most games here in the past few years. So we'll see. But that is a difference maker there as well. You're not going to have the craziness, and I mean, I'll admit it. That's also going to affect Purdue,
absolutely,
big time. Probably more so Purdue than it would IU because Mackey's one of the toughest environments in college basketball. But yeah, I think this is a cold take because there's just a lot of uncertainty with their team, a lot of uncertainty with how the other teams in the Big Ten are going to perform. And then how is the lack of a home court advantage going to affect them?
Now moving on to the Purdue Boilermakers. Last year they were 16-15, also 9-11 in the Big Ten. Travion Williams was a big force for them, 12 points, 8 rebounds per game. Sasha Stefanovic, 9 points per game. He was almost 40% from three-point range, 39%. Eric Hunter was also a key player with 11 points per game, but they were inconsistent. They lost to a mediocre Texas team at home, but then they were able to blow out Virginia. They did defeat 5 ranked teams, which was the second most in program history, and they're one of 10 D1 schools without a senior. So it's going to be interesting to see what they are able to do from the standpoint of it. It reminds me a lot of the football season for Purdue in the sense that, they had, in football last year, they had a lot of young talent that was kind of thrown into battle, but that experience is really going to help them this season. And it's kind of the same situation for the basketball team is they don't really have to move on from anybody who was a big contributor last year. Instead, they can build on what they were able to do last year and kind of use that experience they got last year to help them through this 2020 season.
So I want to kind of counter that, not having to replace anybody that was key contributors. They did lose to transfer Nogel Eastern.
Right.
And Matt Harms. Now, you might say, oh, well, Nogel couldn't shoot worth a darn. I mean, couldn't hit free throws or anything. Yeah, you're right. Defensively, Nogel is going to be missed immensely. I mean, he was a lockdown defender. You could guarantee that he was going to lock down the other team's best player. And then Matt Harms, yeah, he wasn't lighting up the scoreboard or anything, but he was fairly athletic for his size and was a very good rim protector. Surprisingly, he was not a very good rebounder, but he was a very good rim protector, and that I have a feeling is going to be missed. However, I do feel like that is going to open up more opportunities now for some of these younger guys that, in my opinion, are better. That Matt Painter has recruited. For instance, I think now we're going to see more of Jaden Ivey, a true freshman out of South Bend, who played at La Lumiere last year. His mom is actually the women's basketball coach at Notre Dame.
Fun fact.
Nell Ivey, for everybody out there. But he's very talented, very athletic, and has a good shooting stroke, but he's very smart when it comes to basketball. He's got a high basketball IQ. Then there's Ethan Morton, who is going to be that type of Nogel Eastern, that 6'5" point guard. He's probably not going to be as much of a lockdown defender as Nogel was, but he's going to be a better shooter. And Matt Painter has described him as one of the best passers that he's ever seen or ever coached. And that says a lot because Dakota Mathias was a very good passer. So that's going to be a one to step up and watch there. And then other guards to look at, obviously, Brandon Newman, a redshirt freshman from Valpo. He's a guy that in his recruiting class was regarded as one of the best shooters in the country. So it'll be interesting to see how he can play. I know one of the knocks on him last year, the reason they ended up redshirting him was because he just wasn't getting a good grasp on the college game and the Purdue playbook. But in his defense, apparently the Purdue playbook is very intricate and not exactly the easiest one out there. So, but he's got a year of practice under his belt, and apparently he's playing very well in preseason practices. Now, the big one that I think is going to be a big loss is the Matt Harms one, just because he was a high-energy guy and he was such a rim protector. And that also, losing him also is going to have a huge hit to the depth of the center position for Purdue. So you got to hope that Travion Williams is in some of the best condition of his life, because he's not going to have a guy like Matt Harms there to spell him for periods of time, or if he gets into foul trouble, he needs to play some of the best basketball he's ever played. However, there has been the emergence, though, of another center who reclassified to join this class. And I'm sorry for all the fans out there, but yes, Purdue landed themselves on yet another 7-footer, actually over 7 foot, 7'4", Zach Edey, who used to play hockey. He played hockey before he played basketball. Could you imagine seeing a player out there that's 7'4" on ice skates?
Yeah, I'm getting the heck out of the way if that's the case.
I think he would make Zdeno Chara look really small. Apparently, this guy is almost built like an Isaac Haas, but he moves much better because of his background in hockey. Apparently, he has performed really well in preseason practices as well, and the coaches are really high on him and are actually going to be expecting a lot of contributions out of him this year. He is looking like he's locking down the backup center position behind Travion Williams. So that's really good to see as well. But what this team needs to figure out is leadership first and foremost. That was one of the things the team lacked last year, was leadership. And that was what led to a lot of inconsistent play, especially when, you could get up for a game against Virginia. You could get up for a game against Michigan State. Those games were in Mackey. You just live off the energy in that building, and you can get up for those games. Obviously, Virginia wasn't as good as they were the year before, as we saw as the year went on. Michigan State was. We'll give that to them. But they just need to figure out leadership, which is going to help them be more consistent this year. I think they may be a little bit underrated in the preseason rankings for conferences. I think they're coming in at number 8.
Yeah.
In most people's polls. I think that's a little bit low, but it is fair because of how they performed last year. I think they're going to be one of those teams at the middle or the back end of the pack that's going to overperform from their preseason expectation because of the talent that they have there. I do believe that it's not last year. I think was a fluke for that team and this program. Matt Painter is a much better coach than that, and I think he's got this team rounded back into positioning themselves into being the program that they once were. And I could see them exceeding preseason expectations of them.
So that gets us into hot or cold for Purdue. Now, I was trying to think of possibly a question that would trigger you, B. Scott. I was like, should I ask, like, after Purdue, didn't play as well last season in the Big Ten, is Matt Painter on the hot seat? Or do I? No, I know he's not. I was trying to make you mad, B.
That
Scott.
would be a horrible question. We don't know that.
Well, and then I was like, well, wait, do I do what I did last year and predict Purdue to finish in the NIT? But no, so this is the question I've got for you, B. Scott. It's not going to trigger you. But it is Purdue will finish in the upper half of the Big Ten this season. I think that is a hot take. Fansided had their ceiling as the number 4 team in the Big Ten and a Sweet 16 team, with their floor being the 11th seed. And an NIT bid for them. And I think they'll split that. I think they will be about that mid-pack. Now, CBS has them at 8. I do think they should at least be above IU at 7, if not above Rutgers at 6. I think that it'll be kind of in between those predictions that you saw earlier. I think they've got a lot going for them, and they're bringing back a lot more. And then again, like we've said, Coach Painter is just just has his team, knows how to dial in his team and does things the right way. So I'm really excited to see what Purdue can do, but I do think that's a hot take. I think, will it be a season like what we've seen typically in the past where they make a run at the Big Ten championship? I don't know. But I think they are going to have a good year and be kind of in that upper echelon, between that 6 to 8 range in that upper half of the Big Ten and definitely be an NCAA tournament team.
Yeah, I think this is a hot take as well. I feel like I said, I feel like the leadership has gotten better. Matt Painter's gotten a hold on that with his team, and they're going to play more consistent. I think they're going to be a much more athletic team than they have been recently. They're going to have more shooters once again, which is key. Last year, it was really Sasha Stefanovic. You were expecting Aaron Wheeler to do big things, but he just had a dud of a season. I feel like he can only go up from where he was last year. Let's be honest. And I feel like he will. I think he's going to rebound. From what I'm hearing, he's playing a lot looser. He was playing really tight last year. He had a lot of high expectations on himself, and I think he's, coming around to, okay, let's really just go out there and play. And I think you're going to see some moves from him. But if Purdue can find the shooting touch that they had the past few seasons outside of last year, they're going to be a tough team to beat, because obviously it's a Matt Painter team. Matt Painter teams don't make big mistakes. They play sound defense and they move the ball consistently. And if you have several shooters out on the court at once with a scoring threat inside like Travion Williams or potentially Zach Edey, that is a tough matchup for teams. I do think Purdue has an opportunity to finish in the top 4 or 5 of the Big Ten. But you're right. Their floor is potentially, I don't think it's as low as 11th. That's pretty low.
Well, and I think that's just based on the fact that the Big Ten is deep, like we've talked about before. Right. The fact that you have, the team that's 10th is not a bad team.
No. It's the Big Ten, let's be honest. The Big Ten is some of the class of basketball. But I think their floor is probably about where they're preseason predicted at CBS, probably about 8 or 9. And I don't know if there's even going to be an NIT.
Probably not.
But honestly, I do think this is a tournament team. They are a lot more talented than people are giving them credit for, because they are a young team. Nobody really truly knows what they're going to look like. But you never know with Purdue. That's the thing. 2 years ago when they won the Big Ten, uh, Carson Edwards last season. You got to remember, this was a team that started the
Right.
season off horrible. They got blown out by a bad Notre Dame team. I mean, it looked like this team was destined to go nowhere. And then they got on a run in the Big Ten conference play, ended up winning, or I think they co-held the Big Ten that year. I think maybe with Michigan State. I can't remember, but they won the Big Ten championship and made that run to nearly the Final Four. So, like I said, you just never know with Purdue. That's what's fun to watch about them. And I don't know, we'll see. But I think they are a team that will definitely finish in the top half of the Big Ten. I can say that because if you finish at 7th, you're in the top half of the Big Ten.
Now, you brought up Notre Dame. So here's a fun fact. Notre Dame was a 20-win team last year, and I almost forgot to include Notre Dame on the outline. Like, that's how
Notre Dame doesn't believe they're part of the state of Indiana. So.
Right. So I like was making, I wrote the outline for IU, wrote the outline for Purdue, wrote the outline for Butler, and I was going down through, I was looking, I was like, who's the, of the mid-major schools, which I know Notre Dame is not. When I was looking for a mid-major school in the RPI, and I was like, I scrolled down, I was like, oh, Notre Dame exists. And so I was like,
I thought they were only a football school.
Yeah, I thought they just played football. But yeah, it's crazy to think, because I thought it was weird last year when we were doing kind of the conference, when we were getting ready for conference tournament play and that kind of thing, or earlier on in the season. I was like, wait, why is no one talking about Notre Dame as an NCAA tournament team? They're 20-12. They also went 10-10 in the ACC, but they were not a very good team last year. They do return Prentice Hub, who will kind of take over center stage for the Irish. He averaged 12 points, 5 assists per game last year. They also have Juwan Durham back as well. He averaged 8 points and 5 rebounds. He's one of 2 grad students on the roster. There are no other seniors. So it's kind of similar to the Purdue situation in the sense that they have a lot of youth that played last year, and that can only help them this year as that youth has had now a year under their belts. Now, unfortunately, no postseason to kind of get under their belt to kind of have that kind of experience though. But they do have that year under their belt, and now they get to take over. Now, the thing that is different from Purdue is that they're not losing a big chunk of their scoring like they do in the fact that they lost, that Notre Dame loses John Mooney, who was an absolute force for the Irish last year. 16 points, 13 rebounds. I mean, when you're averaging a double-double and you're missing that now this year, does not bode well for Notre Dame. And so, you'd like to think, again, you'd like to think, of the 3 coaches we've talked about so far, Archie Miller, Matt Painter, and now Mike Bray. I mean, Mike Bray's this better in the top 2 in that discussion, and it's up for debate from there on. And you like to think a Mike Bray team would be in better shape, and you would feel a little bit more confidently going into a season. But there's a lot of question marks. Much like there are with the other Indiana teams this year, but just a lot of question marks for this Notre Dame team this year.
Yeah, there is. I know they weren't a very good team last year, but they were an even worse team the year before.
True.
So they are steadily improving. It is really interesting to see Mike Bray teams struggle as much as they have over the past few seasons, because I remember it wasn't that long ago that Notre Dame was one of the best teams in the country.
Well, they beat Kentucky a couple years ago in the Sweet 16. So
where can we find another guy for Notre Dame like Luke Herringody?
Yeah.
That's as a Notre Dame of a name as you can get.
Oh yeah.
But
I think what happened was Ball State got the win over them, and it's just been downhill from there.
Was that last year?
No, that was 2 years ago.
That was 2 years ago.
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah. In their defense, the ACC is an extremely tough conference to play in as well, and when you're going up against Louisville, Duke, North Carolina, Virginia, and Syracuse, night in and night out. Don't forget, NC State's not all that bad. Virginia Tech is usually pretty decent. Florida State, Miami, they're always up there too. It's a gauntlet for them. For me, the biggest expectation I have for them is this to show more improvement from last year. And as long as you can show that you're on the right track to getting back to a tournament team, you could still sneak into the tournament. I feel like there's going to be some, because of COVID, you never know what's going to happen. There's going to be teams that are going to drop out. There's going to be teams that are going to miss a lot of games. That's going to eliminate them from the tournament. And Notre Dame could be right there. And if they just play it's all about consistency. And this team just needs to be consistent night in and night out and show that they have that fight.
Yeah, I mean, now looking at the hot or cold question for Notre Dame, the question is Notre Dame will finish above 500 in the ACC. They're projected by CBS to finish 12th. And I think that's a cold take. I think they do finish under 500. I think it is going to be a gauntlet for them. There's too many question marks. Losing Mooney will be just too much for them. And I think, do I think they're going to be terrible? No, but also, I mean, especially if it's a league-only schedule, I mean, with no kind of relief to go against, get kind of, get into a rhythm against some of those, cupcake teams.
They do have a non-conference game against Purdue.
Okay.
I mean, it's the last year of the Crossroads Classic, I believe.
But yeah, so I just think it's going to be, I mean, like I said, projected to finish 12th out of, 16, teams. It's going to be a rough go for them this year. I think it's going to be a definite learning year. There's, if they can get some players to step up, on that roster, then I think they may be able to do fairly well. But I just don't see them being an above 500 team in 2020.
Yeah, I agree. This is a cold take. I mean, they were last year. They were 20-10.
No, I mean in the ACC.
Oh, in the ACC.
Yeah, they were 10-10 in ACC play.
Yeah, it's a cold take. I think they could finish at 500, to be honest. But Virginia is going to be much better. I mean, Virginia is not going to be a down team like they were last year. Florida State's always really good. Miami's going to be better. Duke is Duke. North Carolina is North Carolina. Louisville's Louisville. Syracuse has an opportunity to be better as well. So it is going to be a tough gauntlet for them, just like it has been in the past. So yeah, I do agree. This is a cold take. I don't think Notre Dame will finish above 500. I'm hoping for 500 for them.
Now, final team that we're going to talk about tonight, as far as the Power Five goes, and that is, or at least the more major conferences, that is the Butler Bulldogs in the Big East. Last year they were 22-9, 10-8 in the Big East. And we talk about going into this season. They had last year. They had the Bryce brothers, who are amazing, who had a great years last year. They had Bryce Nice, who averaged 9 points, 7 rebounds. Bryce Golden, who averaged 8 points and 4 rebounds per game. So they had also played really great defense for the Bulldogs last year as well. So those guys are coming back. Who's not coming back are Kamar Baldwin and Sean McDermott, who combined last year averaged 28 points and 11 rebounds. So they do lose a lot. Now, what is kind of different, because I know you think, oh, hey, Craig, didn't you just talk about Notre Dame losing a bunch of big talent? Why should you believe in Butler, who's also losing a lot of big talent? They do get a really good recruiting class coming in this year, which includes, I know this isn't technically a recruit going in, but Jair Bolden, who transfers from South Carolina. He averaged 9 points per game, but what's most intriguing is he shot 40% from three-point range last year, which is better than anyone on the Butler roster. So you lose Kamar Baldwin, but then you add a talent like Jair Bolden. I think it'll be a situation where, he wasn't getting a lot of playing time in the SEC. He moves down to the Big East, and now he's going to get more of an opportunity to kind of showcase his talent. I think there is kind of a drop-off expected for Butler, but I don't think it's maybe as big as some people might think, losing the amount of talent that the Bulldogs are losing.
Yeah, I mean, it is going to be tough. Let's see here. Let me get everything here. I got my note. Let me check my notes. It is going to be. I think it's going to be some tough growing pains for Butler this year. I think they're going to be. I don't know if they're going to be 9th in the Big East. It could be like a Purdue type situation. It may be a little bit too low for them. I think they're one of those teams that could outplay the current expectations for them. But there could be growing pains for this Butler team. I'm really interested to see now how LaVall Jordan can coach this team, because in the past he had Sean McDermott and Kamar Baldwin to lean on, and those guys are gone. So who's going to step up now and be that leader is going to be one thing, and it is a young team. So I am interested. I am kind of interested to see this team play, but especially I think the biggest loss. I can't remember his name, but he was a transfer from Duke. He's testing the waters for the NBA, and I don't think he's going to get drafted, but he decided to keep his name, decided to forego his last season. He was lined up to be their biggest leader, in my opinion, this season. So that's going to be a big loss. This could be a team that, I don't know. There's just so many question marks here. This is a tough one to even wrap your head around, in my opinion, because it's Butler, and we all know, just you never want to sleep truly on them, but they just haven't had that same Butler magic under LaVall Jordan. And
I think the Butler magic is more Brad Stevens and not so much like just now Butler had success obviously before Brad Stevens, but at the same time,
I think even prior, after Brad Stevens, there was some of that Butler magic. Gosh, my brain is shutting down, and I cannot remember. He's now the head coach at Ohio State, but when he was the head coach at Butler, they had some good runs there as well. But I think this year you could see some growing pains definitely for this team, and as the season goes on, I think they're going to get better. And when you have such a young team like this, not having full workouts constantly is going to be a detriment to them. So I think early on out of the gate, they could be a little slow out of the gate, but they'll pick the steam up as they get into Big East play.
So that brings us to hot or cold. The Butler Bulldogs are an NCAA tournament team. I think that's a hot take. Now, currently, they're picked to finish 9th in the Big East by Sports Illustrated. They were left off of ESPN Bracketology. ESPN Bracketology had 5 teams from the Big East in, and they were not projected as one of those 5. There are uncertainties with the teams projected ahead of them, though. I mean, looking at the CBS ranking, they're ranked 7th. But again, it's one of those situations where the teams in front of them also have question marks. You know, Providence has to replace talent. Marquette has to replace talents. A couple of previews have Xavier in front of them. They have a lot of question marks. And yeah, so does Butler. But I do think that the addition of Jair Bolden does give the team a shot in the arm that they can capitalize on in the post Baldwin and McDermott era. So I think they do capitalize on that and, do sneak into that, 5th or 4th spot. Now, one big kind of wild card in this season in the Big East is the fact that UConn is back, which kind of gives, the Big East kind of that old school feel, which I'm happy about. UConn's in the right spot now. I feel like, it was kind of weird not seeing UConn in the Big East, so I'm glad they are back. So now, and I will say this, we talk about some of that Butler magic, but the magic that Butler has been able to show here recently is against some of the top teams, especially Villanova in the Big East. So they've shown, over these past few years that they can contend with the top of the Big East. I think they do. Yes, they lose some big talent, but they get some big talent in this year. So I think that it's going to be good enough to slide in there. Now, are they going to be, a highly ranked team? Are they going to be a highly projected team in the big, in the big dance in the NCAA tournament? Probably not. I mean, they're probably not going to get past, the first or second round, but I do think that they are an NCAA tournament team.
Yeah, I agree. This is a hot take, mostly because if they just put together a solid record and pass the eye test, they could make it just based on their conference alone. I mean, the Big East is a tough conference to play in, and I think that's having to run through that gauntlet itself will help them get prepared for tournament time. So yeah, I think they have the opportunity to make the tournament just solely based off of the conference they play in. If they just play well enough. It's all you got to do is you just got to play well enough, get into the tournament, and then who knows what could happen.
Now, one last thing before we wrap up here. Thank you guys all for listening and watching. I wanted to, unfortunately, we don't have enough time in the podcast to go through every single school in the state of Indiana and give a preview for them. So we wanted to wrap up the night giving a mid-major school in Indiana, kind of a shout out and a prediction of, a team to watch from the mid-major side of things in the state. And my mid-major school is going to be Valpo. And here's the secret. Here's a little peek behind the curtain, B. Scott. What I did was I went into the RPI rankings. I found the first place team in the RPI for the state of Indiana, and then I said, who's second? That's the team I'm going with. So that would be Valparaiso. They are projected mid-pack in the Missouri Valley Conference. But again, it's a situation where, their returning talent is, someone who had got a lot of experience last year, was kind of thrown to the wolves and succeeded. Donovan Clay averaged 9 points, 5 rebounds in 2019 as a freshman. So, if he can kind of take that next step as a sophomore to lift up that very experienced roster that the Crusaders have, I think it's a situation where, do I think they're going to make the NCAA tournament and win the Missouri Valley Conference and make some big waves? No. But I think they're going to have a successful season. I'm putting more faith in them than I am, Indiana State or Ball State, who I originally picked. I originally picked Ball State, but Ball State, man, I the last few years, it seems like they just have, a lot of hype going in, to especially come at MAC tournament time, and then they just can't seem to get it done in the end. So hopefully that year's different for them, but I think the safer bet is a team from the Missouri Valley Conference, and Indiana has 3 of them: Evansville, Valparaiso, and Indiana State. That's one of the more, tougher mid-major conferences out there. So I think Valpo has a chance to really make a splash and really have a good season.
Thanks, Craig, for taking the most obvious one out there. So
it's what I do. Hey, they were second. I figured the second best team ranked in RPI that was a mid-major Indiana school. I thought that was a safe bet, and that's why I went with the second best, because the obvious choice would be the first best.
So one of the things about me is I'm one of those people that, you remember those tests you used to get in elementary school that you would answer all the questions and you got down to the bottom, and the last question on the test told you not to answer all of the questions, answer any of the questions above. Did you ever get those tests?
No. If I did, I don't remember.
They were supposed to teach you to learn to read instructions before you did anything. I never did very well on those, and to this day, I still don't do very well on those. Long story short, I read best mid-major to give a shout out to, and I did not see the Indiana part. So I did not prepare for the Indiana team. I was going to go with BYU.
Those of you who are wondering, BYU is not in the state of Indiana.
No,
but
far from it.
Hey, but go ahead. Right. Yeah.
Since we have to go with Indiana, I'm pulling up some quick research here. The second, right behind Valpo in the RPI rankings is Ball State. Mm-hmm. So I'm going to go with Ball State just because why not?
Yeah.
It's got to click for them eventually, doesn't it?
Hey, I love to hear that, because that's typically that's the whole reason why I picked Michigan to win the Big Ten a couple of years ago. I was like, at some point it's got to work out, right? And it still hasn't. But
it has to. Okay, so they have a 17.7% chance of making the tournament, a 12.8% chance of being an automatic bid, a 4.9% chance of being an at-large bid. Most likely seed for them is the 13th seed at a 3.5% chance. And get this, they have a 0.1% chance of making a run to the Final Four.
Ooh, I dig it.
So I'm just going to say, they're above at least 1% for as high up as an 8 seed. So, obviously their range is somewhere between 8 and 15, if you're going to look most likely. And I could see it happening. It's going to be the 2020-21 season, 2020-2021 season. Anything can freaking happen this year. Let's be honest. I would not be the least bit surprised to see Ball State play with their hair on fire, make a run through the MAC tournament, and somehow land an 8 seed.
Especially because last year, I mean, anybody that returns from the squad last year knows how good this team was playing right before COVID shut everything down. So, it's not a bad choice at all. I just, you know what? I didn't want to go with my heart, in picking Ball State, so I didn't do it. But yeah,
that's like me picking Purdue to win the Big Ten.
Exactly. So yeah, I mean, I think while they have had their troubles, come time to play in the big game, I mean that's not out of the realm of possibility that they may have, just a great run and much like they did at the end of the season last year.
But at the same time, we look at them with high expectations, and the same thing. I feel like this is just Ball State for you in a nutshell. Looking at the football team, everybody's healthy. They've got some good talent on that team. They have an opportunity. And then they come out in the first game and
yeah,
and then have to go on a game-winning drive to beat Eastern Michigan. I'm like, oh, come on. We just for once?
Now, I will say Eastern Michigan is a better program than when we were in college. Yes. Eastern Michigan has gotten better. But
they are a much improved team. But it just kind of feels like, come on, can't Ball State ever have nice things?
No, never. I mean,
you got a nice new football complex being built.
Yeah.
Yeah, but it's just like, I felt like Mike New was it. I felt like Mike New was going to be the next Pete Lembo.
Yeah, I'm with you. I thought that was going to be kind of the same situation. And he had some successful years at the beginning. Now, granted, that was probably more or less with Pete Lembo's players. But we'll see. This year was supposed to be a much better year. I feel about that new football complex the same as I did about my high school, building an auxiliary gym the year after we went 0-20 in basketball. I was like, what do we do to deserve this? What do you think 3 extra courts on the east side of the school is going to make us a better program? I don't think so.
It helps with PE classes. It helps
True.
With
it actually did. It actually did.
Now, the football complex helps with recruiting.
True.
Remember, in college, you can recruit. That's how you make your teams. You recruit, and you got to have nice.
Wait. Back up, B. Scott. You can recruit. I need a lesson on recruiting in college sports.
To high school.
Right. I know. I miss high school. Right. Yeah. Wink. Oh my god.
You can't recruit in high school. But in college you can. So you got to have nice shiny things to make recruits want to come to your play, or even come visit you.
Which is why Ball State is now the Midwest version of Oregon with like 17 different uniform combinations and all that good stuff. Which, you know what? Not to get off on a tangent, because I know we said we were wrapping it up here, but man, I just miss the old school Ball State look. Like I wish they would bring it back more than they do, because they don't bring it all back anymore.
We're talking. I mean, even when they changed it up while we were there, that was still a good Ball State. It was still played pretty good homage to the original Ball State look.
So
the white pants, the red jerseys with the black thin stripe that thickened up all down the side. The helmet stayed the same. It was still the regular Ball State.
Which helmet, I miss that helmet. Like that helmet's pretty much gone now. So because I will say I do like the red ones that say just the words Ball State. I like those.
I don't like those.
They're a little. I mean, I don't like them better than the original. But
I like the matte black ones.
Yeah. So I was like, I think all they need is, I mean, they're
a throwback game. If Purdue can do a throwback game in their Rose Bowl uniforms, Ball State can do a throwback game to the undefeated season, right?
Yeah, I think so. Yeah, those were interesting ones too, because those ones had like that big thick black stripe up the side.
Stripe, yeah.
I did like those back in the Nate Davis.
Which
ones. Speaking of the undefeated season, if you want to go back and relive one of the highlights of that season, you can on memory lane on our YouTube channel, Crash Course Podcast. That's back in the archives there. Where Ben and I.
Glad we got off track.
Exactly.
Aren't you glad we went off on a tangent?
So if you want to watch the episode of Memory Lane where we dive into that, you can find that on our YouTube channel. So see, it wraps it up nice and clean.
It's never a tangent. It always has purpose.
That will do it for this week's edition of the Crash Course Podcast. Thank you guys all for hanging out, tuning in, listening, everything like that. Remember, you can follow us at Crash Course FM on Twitter. Like us on Facebook, Crash Course Podcast. You can subscribe to our YouTube channel, Crash Course Podcast, where you can see the podcast in its entirety, as well as little segments here and there. And then you can also listen every week on Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, Spotify, wherever podcasts can be heard. You can hear the Crash Course Podcast. B. Scott, where can they find you?
Find me on Twitter at Brandon_Scott87. And Craig, give them one more reminder about Twitch and where they can find us next week on Twitch.
Absolutely. So next week, the live recording of the podcast will be moved to Twitch. So the first week it will be on my personal Twitch page, twitch.tv/CraigCrash. And the following week, we will provide you with the link for the new Twitch channel, which will be where the podcast will be from there on. So make sure you go to twitch.tv/CraigCrash. Make sure you follow. We'll have the podcast. I'm thinking about going live a little bit earlier, kind of informally, and then we'll officially go formal and go into the regular podcast mode. So that's just kind of a little producing on the fly here, but that's the plan for the Crash Course Podcast.
If you want to see the mess behind the scenes, join in early.
Yeah, there you go. Get there a little bit beforehand there. So yeah, it'll be a lot of fun. Really excited for it. So make sure you tune in. But until then, have a good week, everybody.